Alrighty, everyone. It is May 9th, 2025. I am Michael Winkler, and this is The Mike Wink Show. So, let's start off today talking about the Federal Reserve. So, Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, came out a couple of days ago and had a press conference where he addressed inflation rates, potential interest rate cuts, um, basically the Fed's outlook on the near future. 5 key risks highlighted by Jerome Powell that investors must not ignore. While there were no surprises in the U.S. Federal Reserve's policy decision on Wednesday, May 7th, Chair Jerome Powell issued clear warnings for investors. The growth inflation dynamics in the world's largest economy appear murky, and the worst may still yet to come. The U.S. Federal Reserve's FOMC, Federal Open Market Committee, decided to keep the key benchmark interest rates unchanged at 4.25 to 4.5%, and flagged growing risks stemming from President Donald Trump's aggressive tariff policy regime. Gosh, I cannot talk today. Holding interest rates steady for the fourth consecutive meeting, the Fed chair indicated the possibility of a rate cut could be remote because of prevailing uncertainty over the economic fallout of Trump's tariffs. Let's take a look at the 5 key risks flagged by Jerome Powell that investors should not ignore. Number one, the economy. More pain could be in the offing. The U.S. economy could experience more pain in the coming months due to increased uncertainty. Powell said that while the U.S. economy is in good shape, the elevated risks of uncertainties related to the economic outlook still prevail. Uncertainty about the economic outlook has increased further. The committee is attentive to the risks to both sides of its dual mandate and judges that the risks of higher unemployment and higher inflation have risen, said the Fed statement. So what it's referring to, the committee is attentive to the risks to both sides of its dual mandate. Okay, this is very specific language. The Federal Reserve has what's called a dual mandate. They have two goals they are trying to achieve. They're trying to minimize unemployment and minimize inflation as much as possible. And both of those are connected to interest rates. The Federal Reserve has one tool at its disposal, one single lever it can pull, and that is interest rates, raising them higher or lower. There is literally nothing else the Federal Reserve is responsible for. And so they spend all of their time researching and ensuring if it's the right move to increase or decrease the interest rate in relation to how inflation is looking and how unemployment is looking and how actuarial tables suggest they're going to look in the next coming 6 months or so. Trump wants, as far as I understand it, he wants interest rates lowered just like without any, unsurprisingly, without any serious economic consideration, because he sees it as the economy going hot. It makes money cheaper. It makes it much easier to take loans. Makes it much easier to invest in projects. And so in that sense, I think he just sort of blindly assumes like the more we can maximize the economy in that sense, the better. But that is not actually the case. Because if you overcook the economy, it has some serious negative consequences. One of which being inflation, right? It typically, if when you pull the lever one way, it's going to decrease the unemployment rate, but increase inflation. And typically, when you pull the lever the other way, it's going to decrease inflation, but increase the unemployment rate. So it's important to have a level head and to have a thorough analysis of why and to exactly what rate you would raise it to, and to not just be like lowering the rate will increase inflation, as far as I understand it. Hold on, let me look that up. Okay, yeah, so this totally makes sense. Lowering interest rates generally increases inflation and decreases unemployment. This is because lower rates make borrowing cheaper, which encourages spending and investment, leading to higher demand and potentially higher prices. At the same time, increased demand can lead businesses to hire more workers, reducing unemployment. So, yeah, so lowering interest rates is like, it's the classic short-term gain at the expense of long-term planning. Um, he might see, like, if he were to get his wish and artificially lower the interest rate lower than what the Fed determines is the correct spot, he would see probably a year or two of a really hot economy that seems like it's doing well, like the GDP is growing, like probably the stock market would do well and all that jazz. But eventually it would all come to a serious head when the inflation like became a serious problem. And you can get unemployment too low, right? You want a certain amount of you want, I think the sweet spot is somewhere around 2, 3, 5% unemployment. You don't want the unemployment rate at a complete zero, just like you don't want inflation at a zero. The target inflation rate is 2% for a very specific reason. If you got zero inflation rate or a negative inflation rate, it would immediately trigger a recession and likely a full-on Great Depression. So just like unemployment and inflation, they both have a target rate that they're going for, and that just try to maximize or minimize them without any further regard is really short-sighted. The US GDP contracted at a 0.3% annualized rate in the first quarter of 2025. US manufacturing contracted for a second straight month in April. The ICM's manufacturing PMI dropped to a 5-month low of 48.7 in April and from 49 in March. I don't know what any of those acronyms are. ISMs, PMIs. I honestly don't know what those are. And I don't want to look it up right now. Sticky inflation. Powell's comments highlighted that the inflation risk is not behind. He underscored that inflation has eased from its levels seen in mid-2022, but it is still hovering above the 2% long-term objective mark. The risks of higher unemployment and higher inflation appear to have risen, and we believe that the current stance of monetary policy leaves us well positioned to respond in a timely way to potential economic developments, said Powell. The Fed's warning on inflation is a significant negative for the market, as it implies that rate cuts could be delayed beyond the expected timeline, weighing on consumer spending, corporate profitability, and overall economic growth. It appears this classic supply shock conundrum is going to keep the Fed on hold until a clearer sign of weakening in the labor market is present, implying the summer could stay dry as far as the Fed's additional easing is concerned. The next Fed move could get delayed to September, said Madhvaya Madhavi Arora, lead economist at MK Global. Number 3, inflation employment conundrum keeps the Fed in a fix. The U.S. Federal Reserve is having to deal with a complex situation of rising inflation and a strong job market. While job growth has been resilient, the tariff war has increased the risk of inflation. Powell highlighted that if tariffs remain at the current level, the Fed may not meet its inflation and unemployment goals this year. What looks likely is that we will certainly see the risks of higher inflation and higher unemployment have increased. And if that's what we do see, if the tariffs are ultimately put in place at those levels, which we don't know, then we won't see further progress towards our goals, said Powell. Basically, yeah, I guess that's him just sort of saying that's him very broadly saying the tariffs are not good, guys. This is not good. It's not going to end up well for us. And if he actually does what he wants to do, I almost guarantee you we're not going to be able to hit our target goals on either unemployment or inflation. And that's a really bad sign. That's a really, really bad sign. Because typically one's overdone and you're trying to tamper down one. Like you're trying to balance the two. But if neither of them have reached the threshold, they're both below the threshold of being able to balance it in that kind of way. That's a serious, serious problem. I can't remember the last time we've been at that kind of place where both unemployment and inflation are above the target rates in such a way that raising or lowering interest rates aren't going to fix the problem. It's probably been a long time since we've been in that position. Powell flagged fragile household and business sentiment regarding economic growth due to tariff policies. A cautious consumer and business mood could hit spending, delay investment decisions, and further weigh on growth. No preemptive rate cut to mitigate tariff impact. When Trump's tariffs hit U.S. trading allies, expectations soared that the Fed would go for a preemptive rate cut to mitigate the economic pain caused by the trade war. That hope has been dashed, and investors now need to wait for inflation to come down substantially and the job market to cool before the central bank considers a rate reduction. Interesting. When Trump's tariff hit, the expectations soared that the Fed would go after a preemptive cut rate to mitigate the economic caused by the trade war. That would I think that would be the first time the Fed has ever done something like that, if they were to have done that, right? They're not supposed to be they're supposed to be an apolitical entity. They're not supposed to be political actors. They're not supposed to take into consideration Trump saying, I'm going to implement a tariff or I might not. I'm pretty sure they're not supposed to implement all that stuff into their consideration. I'm pretty sure they're supposed to be a strictly economic based consideration and analysis. Um, Also, I agree with them not doing that from like, there's so many different reasons why it makes sense that they wouldn't do that. They don't know for certain what Trump's gonna do, right? He says so much stuff and then doesn't do it. So the fact that he was talking about doing tariffs leading up to his administration or like him taking office, I don't think is anywhere near enough for the Fed to do something like make a preemptive decision like that. And also, furthermore, um, they probably have a pretty good idea of what the impacts of the tariffs would be before they were implemented, right? These are pretty smart people. These are career economists who have been doing this for a long time, but they probably didn't know exactly what they were going to do because we've never done anything like that. We've never put on blanket tariffs on a whole bunch of countries and our allies and stuff. So I think probably to some extent they were like, I guess we just kind of have to see what happens, guys. Like we think maybe it's a good idea to do a preemptive strike here and raise or lower interest rates to try and combat this, but like we don't know for certain what's going to happen. We don't know if Trump's even going to do it. We don't know, and so we just have to let it happen. We can't be proactive. We have to be. I think they have to be exclusively reactive. They can only react to what's happening. They can't be like, we think this is going to happen, therefore we're going to preempt this. The small exception being sort of the whole point of raising and lowering interest rates is sort of to preempt potential changes, future changes in the market. They see the market might change a certain way in 6 months, so therefore they raise or lower the interest rates. But that's sort of what they're doing. That's not what I'm talking about. It's not a situation where we can be preemptive because we actually don't know what the right responses to the data will be until we see more data, said Powell. Yeah, absolutely. How are they supposed to know what to do? They probably have some idea of how it was going to turn out and what they should do, but they don't know exactly, and so they had to wait. They have to be reactive to this. That's the Fed's like mandate. Interesting. I'm still like I still think there's a really serious chance of I think there's a very moderate chance of like a mild recession, mild to moderate recession. I think there's probably 30-40% chance of that. And there's also a 30-40% chance that it's all just going to peter out and that we aren't going to have really much of a recession. It's just going to be kind of business as usual for the most part as far as market growth and whatnot. I think there's a reasonable, like not out of nowhere, maybe 10% chance that we're in for a serious, hardcore, like Great Depression style recession. I wouldn't put the percentage super high. I think if we were to start like going down that lane, I think they would probably find some way to like mitigate the damage and turn it from a severe recession into a mild or moderate one. But Trump has shown that he's willing to be stubborn on some absolutely insane things like the whole Kilmar Abrego, uh, El Salvador prison, the due process, and his stubbornness on the tariff situation so far shows to me like it would only take him being stubborn in the wrong moment for it to actually cause a full-on 10% like worst case scenario Great Depression style recession. I think we have a higher possibility of that happening than we have in a long time, probably since the Great Depression. The guy in control of the government right now is completely unhinged, and so it's just like we're all just passengers in the car along for the ride. He's driving and he's swerving, and we're all just clinging on for dear life, hoping he doesn't do the swerve too hard that sends the car spinning and off the ravine. Let's read this extra article on it. U.S. President Donald Trump renewed his criticism on Thursday of Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, calling him a fool and complaining that the Fed is refusing to lower interest rates. Trump has been on a virtual warpath against Powell in recent weeks, threatening to fire him and then backing away from that threat. He has repeatedly lashed out at Powell in posts on his social media site, calling him a major loser in one post. Trump, speaking one day after the Fed, as financial markets had widely expected, kept its key borrowing rate unchanged, said cutting interest rates would be like jet fuel for the economy, but he doesn't want to do it. He said Powell is not in love with me. So basically, Trump is arguing that Powell doesn't like him and that he's being biased against him, and that's why he's not cutting interest rates. Not because the Federal Reserve has come to its own economic analysis that cutting interest rates would be a bad decision. No, Daddy Trump wants it, and if you don't want to do it, it has to be because you don't like him and it's personal, and that Trump's the victim. Early last week, in remarks suggesting that he is more knowledgeable about interest rates than Powell, Trump said he was not a huge fan of Powell. That's so it is like, bro, it's like the math student and the math professor, and the really naive first day math student thinks he knows more than the professor. It's just so like it's hilarious, honestly, but it's also just like so like it's cartoonish in how like uh narcissistic it is, and how there's no shame. There's just no shame. How can you have no shame in saying that like he's literally out there being like, "Yeah, I know the Fed, I know the economy better than the head of the Federal Reserve itself." Are you, bro? There's just zero shame. Shame is not even like in his dictionary. The Fed this week kept short-term borrowing costs in the 4.25 to 4.5% range. Is Trump really arguing that like Powell is willing to tank the economy because he has a vendetta against Trump? That's just so ridiculous. Where they have The Fed this week kept short-term borrowing costs in the 4.25 to 4.5% range, where they have been since December. While the big tariffs imposed by Trump are likely to increase both inflation and unemployment, the economy so far has shown little sign of either, Powell said on Wednesday, giving the central bank time to wait until there is more clarity on where tariffs actually end up and assess their effects on prices and jobs. At that point, the Fed can act as needed and potentially aggressively, he said. That's what's so scary about all this tariff stuff, is that the actual true economic impact is delayed by a good 3, 6, 9 months, maybe even a full year to see the full impacts at least. And so it's deceptive because you people could he could do the tariffs, it could be 2 or 3 months out, and not a whole lot has changed, and people could get the false idea that it actually wasn't that bad, but then the train is just pulling into the station, and then it really hits 6 months in or 9 months in, and then, at that point, it's so far down the line that people maybe even have a hard time connecting the tariff policy decisions to the economic downturn. Trump had a different view. Too late, Jerome Powell is a fool. He doesn't. Oh my God, I have to read it in his accent. Too late. Jerome Powell is a fool who doesn't have a clue. He wrote in a post on Truth Social on Thursday morning. Oil and energy way down, almost all costs, grocery and eggs down, virtually no inflation. Cutting interest rates typically boosts the economy, but in a time of above average target inflation, doing so could also unleash an upward spiral of price pressures that Powell has said must be avoided. Trump named Powell as the Fed chair in 2018 during his first term in the White House, and Democratic President Joe Biden appointed Powell to a second 4-year term in 2022. Okay, it's really scary because the cabinet Trump put together in 2016 and during his first administration is like the all is like the Eastern Conference All-Star team compared to the junior varsity high school team that is his current cabinet. His current cabinet is a joke compared to his old one. And so it is mildly reassuring that Jerome Powell was appointed during his first term, back when there was at least maybe a few adults left in the room. Um, that's also why it's particularly scary that he is talking about getting rid of him, and he's like floating the idea of firing him, because I would be very worried about who he would put in his place. I have zero trust that he would put anybody that would be even anywhere as good. My full expectation would be that he would put somebody in that has no idea what they're talking about. And I think maybe that's why he hasn't done it so far. I think maybe Trump realizes just how important the Fed is, and just like seriously, it is one of the the table legs holding up the whole country, basically. And so I think maybe that's why he hasn't gone so crazy on it like he has on a bunch of other issues, because he realizes the negative impacts of it could be so much more than all the other issues. Oh, so wait, so they're 4-year terms. So he was appointed to his second term by Biden in 2022. So that means that he's up for, yeah, I saw this. He's up for potentially being replaced in 2026. I think I'm laying down a small prediction right now. I'm laying down a small prediction that if the economy doesn't do great until 2026, if we kind of stay about the same or have a recession, I think Trump will spaz out, lose his freaking mind, fire Powell, and appoint some insane, completely devoid from reality, potentially not even an economist person to head the Fed. And they will do something that legit full on crashes the economy, turns it from a mild recession, uncertain markets to a full on Great Depression style economy. Maybe this is how it actually happens, right? 2026, he replaces Powell with a complete lunatic sycophant who then cuts the interest rates prohibitively low, spiking unemployment rate, or spiking inflation and causing a spiral, some sort of weird spiral situation in which inflation spikes and it perpetuates it would only perpetuate the income inequality and wealth disparity problem we have in this country. That would put that on overdrive, which he has signaled through and through his campaigning on the second term and his second term that he's actually for that. That he wants to go back to the robber baron era of like the 1800s, the mid late 1800s, where there was like a handful of extremely rich guys that basically owned and ran everything, and that we lived in a true oligarchy, and that he wants to bring us back to that. To the extent that we have moved away from that, he wants to bring us back to that. Trump and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said Trump and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer on Thursday announced a breakthrough deal on trade, the first since Trump announced steep import levies on most U.S. trading partners on April 2nd, before subsequently pausing some of them to allow time to reach country by country deals. The first glimmer of uncertainty amid what had been an increasingly foggy outlook makes the Fed actually less likely to cut rates aggressively. That was the read from financial markets, as traders pulled back Thursday from what had been overwhelming bets on a July start to interest rates reductions, with any more than 3 rate cuts by year's end seen as increasingly unlikely. Trump has made no secret of his disaffection with Powell's conduct of monetary policy ever since shortly after picking him as Fed chair early in his first term. Trump's suggestion last month that he would like Powell gone sent stocks and bonds both down as investors priced as both down as investors priced in the chance the Fed could lose its independence and thereby its ability to restrain inflation. Yes, absolutely. The market is in a lot of ways completely irrational. Like you can look at the Tesla stock value and be like, there's no connection to reality here. This is complete nonsense. Okay. But there are a number of ways in which the market is very much connected to reality. And one of them is knowing that part of what makes the US economy so strong is its stability, is its like the way it maintains itself, the way it points people like Jerome Powell to responsibly lower or raise the interest rate. And the market, I think the market broadly understands. It's weird talking about it like this because the market is sort of an ethereal thing and it doesn't have an understanding of something. But to the extent we can talk about it like this, the market has a deeper understanding of like what creates a stable environment. And the market is all about stability. They hate uncertainty. And so they understand that any comment related, like basically anything attacking Powell or anything implying that Trump is going to put in a political ally or something into the Fed is very scary for the stability of these markets. It is inherently uncertainty. This is literally like Trump took uncertainty into a fucking like syringe and put it straight into the veins of the market without any change, right? Like nothing has changed, but simply his comments that he signaling what he might do and his lunacy on everything else is like by all of these put together creates uncertainty. He is uncertainty when he talks about this. He is injecting uncertainty straight into the market's veins by making comments like this. It's so irresponsible. Powell, asked about Trump's criticisms in his news conference on Wednesday, declined to comment. He said he intends to complete his term as chair, which ends in about a year. Powell met a total of 3 times with Biden. Powell's calendars also show he had a 90-minute dinner with Trump at the White House during his first stint there, as well as several other shorter encounters, but has not spoken with him since 2019. Powell said on Wednesday that he never has sought and never would seek a meeting with the president. It's always been the other way, he said Wednesday. Talking to Powell, Trump said on Thursday, is like talking to a wall. It makes sense that Powell wouldn't go to Trump to talk. That's not his job. Powell's job is to head the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve's job is to be reactive to the economy and to pull the single lever they have, the interest rates raising or lowering, to decide, all right, guys, we're going to pull it this way or we're going to pull it this way. That is their whole job. They have to be reactive. Why would he have any interest or reason to have a meeting with you? You, Trump, might have reason to have a meeting with Powell. That's conceivable. Sure, but it's just, of course, Powell wouldn't be going to Trump. There's no, that's just not the mechanisms of the how this works. Trump would be going to Powell. So let's move on to India and Pakistan. So I haven't been able to do the show for the last few days, and a bunch of shit has happened in the last few days. India and Pakistan have almost started a war with each other. Um, I have only seen a few headlines, so I'm going to be reading a lot of this for the first time with y'all. The headlines I have seen so far are things along the lines of like a handful of fighter jets and drones have been shot down, and that there have been a number of like artillery and missile strikes in the Kashmir area and along the border between Pakistan and India. I don't know much more about it. I'm hoping to learn some more about the motivations and reasoning. Um, I saw a like sort of normie casual GIF trying to explain the dynamic between India and Pakistan. And I don't know if this GIF was correct. It could be totally spin, but the GIF implied that India is doing more of the provoking in this situation. I don't know if that's actually true. I'm hoping these articles will teach me whether that's true or not. Um, but it would be believable. It would line up with statements Modi, the Prime Minister of India, has been making over the last few years regarding like potential conflict with Pakistan, or he's been casually floating the idea of a little spat with them. And I think this terrorist attack that happened a month ago in India or so was just the right kind of thing for him to use as an excuse to do this thing I think he's been wanting to do for a while. 2 weeks after a deadly militant attack on tourists in India-administered Kashmir, India has launched a series of strikes on sites in Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. The Indian Defense Ministry said the strikes named Operation Sindoor were part of a commitment to hold accountable those responsible for the 22nd April attack on Palgram, Indian-administered Kashmir, which left 25 Indians and one Nepali national dead. But Pakistan, which has denied any involvement in that attack, described the strikes as unprovoked, with Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif saying the heinous acts of aggression will not go unpunished. Sharif on Wednesday said the Palgram attack wasn't related to Pakistan and that his country was accused for the wrong reasons. So I guess, if I understand it correctly, there was a terrorist attack by a terrorist group that I guess is allegedly based out of Pakistan, and that India went in there and was like, "Hey, we're gonna go bomb these dudes," and that Pakistan was like, "We didn't give you permission to come in here and just start bombing our shit. Like, that's not cool, homie." My understanding is that's kind of what's happened. Pakistan's military said at least 31 people were killed and 57 injured in the strikes on Tuesday night. India's army said at least 15 civilians were killed and 43 injured by Pakistani shelling on its side of the de facto border. Pakistan's military says it shot down 5 Indian aircraft and a drone. India has yet to respond to these claims. Late on Wednesday, Sharif said the Air Force made its defense, which was a Late on Wednesday, Sharif said the Air Force made its defense, which was a reply from our side to them. This is like totally speculative and totally based off of like uh, vibes. So I could be way off on this, and I don't want anybody to interpret this in the wrong way. But I have more faith that India would try and mitigate civilian casualties than Pakistan. Pakistan, my gut tells me, would be more willing to do indiscriminate shelling or bombing and would be less interested in minimizing civilian casualties. I don't know that for certain, but my gut tells me, just based on how their societies are, that it aligns more with the way that that sort of cruelty and lack of regard for civilian life is indicative of a lot of Arab countries and how they have handled conflicts over the last number of decades. And so that's what sort of leads me to think that is I think their religion potentially informs them in that sort of way and helps them lean towards a bit more in being a bit more indiscriminate in the way they attack. Delhi said in the early hours of Wednesday morning that 9 different locations had been targeted in both Pakistan administered Kashmir and Pakistan. It said these sites were terrorist infrastructure, places where attacks were planned and directed. It emphasized that it had not hit any Pakistani military facilities, saying its actions have been focused, measured, and non escalatory in nature. I am slightly inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt on that. Slightly inclined to give India the benefit of the doubt on that. I am not inclined to give Pakistan the same benefit of the doubt for the reason I just explained. In the initial aftermath of the attacks, Pakistan said 3 different areas were hit: Mazaf- Muzaffarabad and Kotli in Pakistan administered Kashmir, Bahawalpur in the Pakistani province of Punjab. Pakistan's military spokesperson, Lieutenant General Ahmed Sharif, later said 6 locations had been hit. Pakistan's defense minister Khawaja Asif told GOTV in the early hours of Wednesday that the strikes hit civilian areas, adding that India's claim of targeting terrorist camps was false. India's like, oh, we only went after the terrorist camps guys. And Pakistan's like, no, you didn't. You hit some civilians and you hit some other stuff. Like, you didn't only target terrorist camps. It seems like that's where we're at right now. Why did India launch the attack? The strikes come after weeks of rising tension between the nuclear armed neighbors over the shooting in the picturesque resort town of Palagram. The 22nd of April attack by a group of militants saw 26 people killed, with survivors saying the militants were singling out Hindu men. It was the worst attack on civilians in the region in 2 decades, and the first major attack on civilians since India revoked Article 370, which gave Kashmir semi-autonomous status in 2019. I didn't know that. I didn't know that they were semi-autonomous pre-2019 and that India basically changed that. Following the decision, the region saw protests, but also witnessed militancy wane and a huge increase in the number of tourists. The killings have sparked widespread anger in India, with Prime Minister Narendra Modi saying the country would hunt the suspects till the ends of the earth, and that those who planned and carried it out will be punished beyond their imagination. However, India initially did not name any group it believed was behind the attack on Pahalgam. But Indian police alleged that 2 of the attackers were Pakistani nationals, with Delhi accusing Pakistan of supporting militants, a change Islamabad denies. It says it has nothing to do with the 22nd April attacks. I would be unless I saw some significant, I would be so inclined to give Pakistan the benefit of the doubt that they did not have a direct hand in this. I think it's conceivable that they might have some sort of indirect funding related hand in this, but like I think you would need pretty substantial evidence to claim that. And on the surface level, I am willing to give Pakistan a small benefit of the doubt on this and say if they said that they had no ties to this terrorist attack, I believe them. It would be just weird for Pakistan and India, who have ostensibly and for the most part been living side by side to each other without too much problem over the last number of decades, randomly decides to to like direct curate a very targeted racial terrorist attack in India. It just seems weird and illogical. And so I'm willing to give them a small benefit of the doubt that when they say we didn't do this, guys, that they're telling the truth, or at least to any provable extent, they're telling the truth. On May 7th, Indian Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri said Pakistan-based Lashkar-e-Taiba militant group carried out the attack. In the 2 weeks since, both sides had taken tit-for-tat measures against each other, including expelling diplomats, suspending visas, and closing border crossings. But many expected it would escalate to some sort of cross-border strike, as seen after the Pulwama attacks, which left 40 Indian paramilitary personnel dead in 2019. Why is Kashmir a flashpoint between India and Pakistan? Kashmir is claimed in full by India and Pakistan, but administered only in part by each, since they were partitioned during the independence from Britain in 1947. The countries have fought 2 wars over it. But more recently, it has been attacks by militants which have brought the two countries to the brink. Indian-administered Kashmir has seen an armed insurgency against Indian rule since 1989, with militants targeting security forces and civilians alike. In 2016, after 19 Indian soldiers were killed in Uri, India launched surgical strikes across the line of control, the de facto border between India and Pakistan, targeting militant bases. In 2019, the Pulwama bombing, which left 40 Indian paramilitary personnel dead, prompted airstrikes deep into Balakot, the first such action inside Pakistan since 1971, sparking retaliatory raids and an aerial dogfight. Neither spiraled, but the wider world remains alert due to the danger of what could happen if it did. Attempts have been made by various nations and diplomats around the world to prevent this. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres quickly called for maximum restraint, a sentiment echoed by the European Union and numerous countries, including Bangladesh. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer urged dialogue and de escalation. U.S. President Donald Trump, who was one of the first to respond, told reporters at the White House that he hoped the fighting ends very quickly. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, meanwhile, said he was keeping a close eye on developments. Interesting. So I didn't know they had a similar thing happen in 2019 where they had a bombing, they crossed the actual border, did some raids and airstrikes, and that there was some dogfighting and planes knocked down, and that some military personnel died. There was a small amount of fighting that happened, but ultimately it fizzled out and they kind of went back to business as usual. That is ultimately my prediction with all of this. This article was uploaded 2 days ago, so this next article we're going to read on this is hopefully going to have a little bit more of a recent update, maybe some stuff we've seen in the last 2 days. But bar there being some special piece of information in this coming article, I predict that this is going to fizzle out just like it did in 2019, that neither country has any interest or penchant for a larger scale conflict, and that to the extent that this is happening, it is uh, probably somewhere in the Venn diagram realm of Modi trying to be authoritarian and opportunistic, the Pakistanis being like maybe overly protective and uh, uh, potentially corrupt if there is really some connection between them and the terrorist attack, but I doubt there is. Um, I think there's probably a lot of different factors that go into creating this scenario right now, but I see nothing to indicate to me that this is really going to spiral out of control into a serious large scale conflict. India Pakistan is a very scary ongoing long-term conflict in that it is one of the flashpoints that could create nuclear annihilation. I would think the two top candidates to create an Armageddon would be North Korea, South Korea, and India Pakistan. They're both neighboring countries in long-term conflict with each other. Both are nuclear powers and both understand the concept of mutually assured destruction. If one fires a single nuke at the other, it's all GG. It's all game over. They're both going to go buck wild at each other, and then it's probably going to drag in other countries. Then the whole world is all nuking each other. Okay, they're all aware of the concept of mutually assured destruction. So I think ultimately this is all going to fizzle out. That they don't really have an interest or a penchant for this kind of conflict, and that nobody wants this is happening. But like, there's a lot of chest puffing, a lot of a lot of posturing. I'm sure India felt like they needed to respond or the Indian government felt like they needed to respond to the terrorist attack in some sort of meaningful way, and then Pakistan probably felt the same. Oh, they came in without permission, they crossed over and killed civilians and did all this, and even if they were targeting terrorist infrastructure exclusively, we're still not totally cool with this, and it looks really bad to our citizenry, and it's bad PR, and we've got to look like we're pushing against them, especially considering there's this whole dynamic of they see each other as adversaries. So it would be different if like Mexico did this. It'd be weird, like why are we being so aggressive towards Mexico and stuff? But they have this long history of being adversarial towards each other, so it entirely makes sense. Let's read this next article on this and see if it gives any more recent information on the conflict. Gosh, I am so hungry. I wish I brought a snack. Jesus. I also wish I brought freaking bug spray. I'm getting eaten alive by mosquitoes during the show. It's crazy. Eaten alive. I think I've gotten like 10 mosquito bites. As war clouds loom over India and Pakistan, let us remember the common man. As the military escalation between the two neighbors rises, how do we hold on to hope, peace, and our humanity? On the night of May 6th, India went to bed. In the morning, we were at war. When I woke up on Wednesday at about 4:30 a.m. to use the bathroom, the glow of my phone screen caught my bleary eye. Still half asleep, I picked it up, only to be jolted awake by headline after headline screaming the same unthinkable message. India had launched a series of strikes into Pakistan targeting terrorist strongholds. My husband was getting ready to. Okay, pause for a second. This is unlocking a memory. I'm pretty sure the military I'm pretty sure Osama bin Laden was hiding in Pakistan, and that when we captured or killed him, or when we raided his facility and killed him, supposedly, that it was in Pakistan. And so it is, if that is true, if I'm remembering this correctly, then Pakistan does have a history with radical jihadist, Islamist terrorism. And so it is not, that is something to keep in mind, all of this, that like Pakistan does have a history with this, and I don't really know if India does. It's not like a mirror. Pakistan has a history of this and India has a history of this. I think it's more just Pakistan has a history of this and India is more of a good faith actor. That's my understanding. My husband was getting ready to catch a 7 a.m. flight from New Delhi to Jaipur. My phone beeped again. Some flight routes were being canceled, and a few airports in northern India might be shut down. It was unclear whether this was a precautionary measure or in anticipation of possible Pakistani retaliation by air. We decided it was too risky. He would drive instead. In the hour and a half before the world woke up to the news that had already upended my night, I was caught in a pendulum of emotions, waves of fear, anxiety, a deep sense of unease, and most of all, helplessness. I kept refreshing the news, hoping for more clarity, anything that might make things feel less surreal. Of course, like every other Indian, I knew the catalyst for the offensive, the recent terrorist attack in Palgram, a truly horrific act in which 26 unarmed Indian tourists were killed. India had blamed the attack on Pakistan-based militants, a charge that Pakistan denied. In the days that followed, India responded with a series of strong measures, suspending the Indus Waters Treaty, expelling Pakistani nationals, and cutting trade ties. Pakistan, too, expelled Indians, closed their airspace, and suspended the Simla Agreement. At home, too, there were ramifications. As is often the case when tensions flare between India and Pakistan, Indian Muslims and Kashmiris bore the brunt. Some were relieved of their jobs, others of their accommodation. Some were assaulted, others branded terrorists. Amid the noise and fury, Himanashi Narwal, the widow of one of those killed in Palgram, made an admirable appeal for peace over hatred, urging people not to target Muslims or Kashmiris. Ironically, she was met with a flood of abuse and trolling. In the days and weeks that followed, the Indian government continued to promise military retaliation. Still, many of us didn't quite believe it. Both nations are nuclear armed, and India is hemmed in between Pakistan and its ally, China. Political posturing was to be expected, but surely, when it came down to it, de escalation would be the preferred choice. As the sun began to rise, the WhatsApp groups buzzed alive. It was a day of triumph, chest thumping, meme churning, and flag waving. One group hopefully debated the astrological likelihood of a full fledged war, while others quickly filled with gleeful Islamophobic rhetoric, comparing the airstrikes to Diwali. Neither debated the human cost of war or the terrifying possibility of a nuclear conflict. The ongoing euphoria is disorienting. On our side, at least 15 civilians have lost their lives in cross border artillery shelling that followed the airstrikes. Countless others spent the night in terror, praying they might live to see the sunrise. Yet, amid all the violence, the local populations of Kashmir remained invisible, once again trapped in the crossfire. As the world around me appears to reveal in this moment, I feel a quiet, persistent ache. Pain for the lives lost, pain for the division that's growing wider, and pain for the values I grew up with, which now seem to be slipping further from our grasp. How shall I speak of peace when the very foundation of empathy feels threatened? How can the values of freedom, democracy, and pluralism be protected when they are twisted into tools of division? And most of all, how can we hold onto our humanity in these troubled times? How do we balance our love for our country with compassion for the innocents caught in the middle of this conflict? At what point do we, as a society, allow humanity to transcend the politics of war and choose a different path? While others celebrate, I can't help but feel a profound disconnect. Almost like the emperor's new clothes, the human tragedy remains invisible. Calls for peace and diplomacy have fallen silent, replaced by blistering war crimes, leaving no room for ordinary citizens to express their sadness, anxiety, and uncertainty. And if, amid all this cacophony, I feel so overwhelmed and isolated in my heartbreak, I wonder, surely I can't be the only one. In the end, I can only mourn what is lost, both in lives and values. It was well written. I like the last couple paragraphs of that. Um, Very well written. Um, while this article didn't really present any like significant new piece of information compared to the last article we read, it does point out. I think there's something here that connects with me in a way that even connects to politics here. This idea he mentions empathy. Hold on, where does he mention empathy? Yeah, how shall I speak of peace when the very foundation of empathy feels threatened? How can I like that to me, I think what he's saying there may be indicative of what's happening there and what's happening in the middle of this conflict specifically, but I think it's also indicative of what's happening more broadly in sort of the way people interact with politics and philosophy and humanity, that there seems to be this overt attack on empathy and this overt attack on the idea of sharing and collectivization and a complete disregard for the importance and the fundamentality that it plays in the building of our society and the maintaining of our society. So yeah, scary stuff. Um, Hopefully I'm correct in my assessment that it all fizzles out and that it will be a footnote, sort of like 2019 was. We'll look back in 4 or 5 years and be like, yeah, they had that little spat, maybe 100 people died collectively, a couple planes shot down, some bombing was done, and that'll be that. All right, let's move on. So we'll probably cover this story quickly since it was axed. So I saw this talked about a few days ago, that the House or the Senate was putting forth a bill that would basically ban boycotting Israel, but not from government entities or like anything that's received government funding. I'm pretty sure the bill was just like for regular people, which on its face seems insane and ridiculous. You can't litigate what people can and can't spend their money on, right? That is part of. You can't be like, I don't know how you would even potentially litigate that. How could you prove somebody's choosing not to buy the specific hummus or something because it's from Israel? Like, how could you possibly determine whether they just like this other hummus more or not? Like, I don't understand. Let's see. Hopefully this will give more information. It all seemed very silly, and maybe that's why it didn't work out. Republican House leaders axed a planned vote on Monday for a bill intended to protect Israel from boycotts amid a backlash from some conservatives over free speech concerns. Former Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz compared the provisions in the legislation to the 10th biblical plague of Egypt, the death of the firstborn. If this bill becomes law, how many Israeli products do I need in my home to avoid fines or prison? Gates asked. Yeah, how could you possibly enforce this? How could you possibly determine whether somebody's choosing to not purchase a product because of they're doing it because of political reasons in BDS or because they just don't like the product and prefer another one? You could there's no way you could parse that out. This is so weird. You could maybe you could maybe, and they've done this before, I think, create some sort of similar bill, but says like if you receive federal funding or you're a federal agency or something, you're not allowed to actively change things you're already doing, like to reflect BDS goals. That could be enforceable and would make sense, but this isn't that. I hate to say I'm agreeing with Matt Gates, but he's right on this. If I leave an Israeli-made product outside my home, is it the 2025 version of lamb's blood that keeps my family safe? Yeah, exactly. Would you need to like prove, like have this minimum, uh, some sort of minimum threshold of proof that you're not engaging in BDS? Like, it's weird. The bipartisan bill, titled the International Governmental Organizations Anti-Boycott Act, would extend existing anti-boycott legislation that bars Americans from complying with bans imposed by foreign countries to also forbid compliance with boycotts imposed by international government organizations like the United Nations. The legislation doesn't mention Israel explicitly, but the Jewish state has long been the target of international boycott efforts. I've heard of the BDS movement for over 10 years. So, yes, the boycott, divest, and sanction movement for Israel specifically has been around for a long time. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, Anna Paulina Luna, and Thomas Macy were among Republicans to speak out against the bill. Americans have the right to boycott, and penalizing this risks free speech, Luna wrote. I reject and vehemently condemn anti Semitism, but I cannot violate the First Amendment. A spokesman for Representative Josh Gottheimer, a co sponsor of the bill, slammed the Republican leadership for caving to Green, who speculated in 2019 that the Rothschilds might have caused wildfires in California by beaming the sun's energy back to Earth. She just gets more hilarious every time you read something she says. It's beyond outrageous and offensive that House leadership bowed to extreme right forces and pulled this common sense bipartisan bill that makes anti-Semitic and hate-driven boycotts illegal, Tony Nguyen, Gottheimer's communications director, told JNS. Who was behind this effort, Wen said. None other than a member of Congress who once claimed that Jews have space lasers and another who refused to condemn Hamas, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Macy, should be ashamed of themselves. The bill's co-sponsor. Oh, so they're so wait, this is one of the extremely, extremely rare times that these lunatic people like Marjorie Taylor Greene come out and actually give like a principled, logical reason for their opposition to a bill. And then you're gonna come out and call it just like sort of just vaguely allude to it being ridiculous that they aren't gonna support it or whatever. Like these are your most hardcore sycophantic, like these are the MAGA of MAGAs. To the extent the Republican Party isn't the Republican Party anymore, it's the MAGA Party. They are the MAGA MAGAs. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Macy and Anna Paulina Luna. They can't do like I think that if it was almost anybody else, they would do the classic like, oh, they're too far left. Basically, try and pretend like they're socialists or something. But even the Republicans know they can't do that with Marjorie Taylor Greene or some of these other people. So they just have to be really broad and just be like, oh, it's bad that you don't do this. Oh, there's anti-Semitism and hate, and this would stop that. Are you crazy? You not do this? Blah 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 without giving any actual like counter argument to the reason why they gave for not supporting the bill. The bill's sponsor, Republican Mike Lawler, defended the legislation on the grounds that the underlying Anti-Boycott Act was signed into law by US President Donald Trump in 2018. Lawler also criticized Green for backing international government organizations. So wait, what? Bill sponsor Republican defended the legislation on the grounds that the underlying Anti-Boycott Act was signed into law by President Donald Trump in 2019. I'm not exactly sure what his criticism is. Is he saying that Is he criticizing her because she previously supported the bill that was the similar bill that they're building off of in 2019, but that she doesn't support, or that Marjorie Taylor Greene, and some of these other wackos don't support the amended version of it now? Is that what he's implying? That basically because Daddy Trump, why would you not? He's basically saying, why would you not support Daddy Trump? You're supposed to support Daddy Trump. You supported Daddy Trump before. Why aren't you supporting Daddy Trump now on the exact same issue that we're sort of just like working off of? That seems like what he's saying. Also, Lawler also criticized Green for backing international governmental organizations. That's so weird. Like, isn't she like the classic, like, anti-globalism, like thinks that there's a cabal of Jews running the world, that the Jewish space lasers, they have space lasers, and that Freemasons, and isn't she like full in on all that and is like inherently against governmental organizations, right? Sort of baked into the middle of all this is like a weird pseudo-libertarianism where they are against the government doing anything at all and think taxation is theft and stuff. So this criticism that Green is Lawler also criticized Green for backing international governmental organizations. I don't know if that's actually true. Is he arguing that because she's not in favor of the bill, she is necessarily in favor of international governmental organizations? It's just a weird, I don't know what he means by this. This is simply holding the United Nations accountable, Lawler wrote. Was President Trump virtue signaling when when he signed the original bill? And when did you become a defender of the United Nations? Yeah, so my assessment was 100% right. He's just a lunatic. On Friday, he's just a bad faith actor. On Friday, the office of House Majority Leader Steve Scalise released a schedule of votes for Monday that included the bill, but the updated House schedule on Monday morning did not include it. Illegal challenges arguing that similar state-level anti-boycott legislation violates the First Amendment have a poor record in court. In 2023, the 5th, 8th, and 11th Circuit Courts of Appeal each upheld state laws designed to counter the anti-Israel boycott, divestment, and sanction movements in separate cases. The Supreme Court has declined to consider appeals to those rulings. Yeah, it would seem to me on its face, the whole idea of trying to restrict average citizens on how they're going to spend their money and what they're going to buy and choose to not buy. It seems not only I can't think of a legal way that makes sense, but it also seems antithetical to the whole concept of the United States, right? We're supposed to be a pseudo free market economy where you vote with your dollar. So like this sort of how are you supposed to vote with your dollar if you're literally being restricted on the ways that you can vote with your dollar? It doesn't make sense to me. It seems antithetical to the concept of the United States as well as just stupid. All right, let's move on. I don't think there's really a whole lot more to say about that. Funding for PBS children's shows killed by Trump administration citing woke propaganda. This was from yesterday, or at least the article was from yesterday. As the Trump administration continues to try and defund NPR and PBS, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting said this week that the Department of Education has ended a federal grant that helped fund children's shows. In a press release on May 6th, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting said the canceled grant was called Ready to Learn. The cutting will result in a loss of $23 million that the CPB said would have gone to children's games and educational shows. Nearly every parent has raised their kids on public broadcasting's children's content. For the past 30 years, Ready to Learn funded PBS Kids content has produced measurable real-world impacts on children's learning. Patricia Harrison, president and CEO of CPB, said in the press release. Ready to Learn has received strong bipartisan support from Congress for the last 30 years because of the program's proven educational value in advancing early learning skills for all children. We will work with Congress and the administration to preserve funding for this essential program. The 2020 to 2025 cycle, which expires September 30th, was approved by the first Trump administration. Programs funded by the Ready to Learn grant have included the iconic shows Sesame Street, Reading Rainbow, and Clifford the Big Red Dog. Now popular shows like Molly of Denali and Work It Out Wombats and Lila in the Loop are being funded by the grant, CPB said. Oh, I didn't know Bob Ross's painting shows were at least some of them were part of this program. Interesting. In a statement sent to USA Today, Mari Biederman, a spokesman for the Department of Education, said the cuts were to funding racial justice educational programming. What? In a statement sent to USA Today, the spokesperson for the said the cuts were to funding racial justice educational programming. That's such a that's like a weird corporate speak way of basically saying the silly woke propaganda argument. This is not aligned with Trump administration policies. The Trump Department of Education will prioritize funding that supports meaningful learning and improved student outcomes, not divisive ideologies and woke propaganda, Biederman said. I wonder if Biederman, the fact that he chooses to use the phrasing racial justice educational programming as opposed to woke propaganda, which is what Trump would say, is hilarious to me. Just so stupid and brainless to call it that. They're If I'm going to be as good faith as I can possibly be here, you could theoretically have things in the PBS programming that you're against and want to argue against. But to just say broadly that it's woke propaganda without any further nuance or discussion or whatever is just so lazy and like cringy and shameful and embarrassing, rephrases it racial justice and educational programming. It reminds me of like when you call your employees like team members or something, this like corporate like whitewashing to try and make these things sound less like negative or bad. I don't know. It's just funny. PBS Kids, we will continue to fight. Sarah DeWitt, Senior Vice President and General Manager of PBS Kids, said in a statement to USA Today they would continue to fight to keep providing shows for children in the U.S. This decision removes critical resource this decision removes a critical resource public television has used to enable us to create high-quality educational PBS Kids content while opening up worlds of possibilities for millions of kids across the country. We will continue to fight in order to maintain our essential service, DeWitt said. Cuts to PBS, NPR on ongoing fight. The cuts to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting came as the Trump continued and defund PBS and NPR. Trump signed an executive order instructing the CPB to cease and desist funding to NPR and PBS, according to the text released by the White House on May 1st. It labeled the news outlet as partisan and biased. The CPB board shall cancel existing direct funding to the maximum extent allowed by law and shall decline to provide future funding, the order added. Both NPR and PBS have previously said that Trump's efforts to cut their funding would disrupt essential media services and have a devastating impact on Americans who rely on them for credible local and national news, including during emergencies. So I'm going to click on the sign an executive order directing the CPB to cease and direct funding to NPR and PBS. Corporation for Public Broadcasting is the CPB. Okay. So I guess the CPB is in charge of. Okay, so the CPB oversees all these sort of like pseudo-governmental media organizations like PBS, NPR, the Bob Ross stuff, the educating children's thing they mentioned. That all makes sense. Order that aims to cut funding for PBS and NPR. This was uploaded May 2nd, so a week ago. Washington. President Donald Trump signed an executive order that aims to cut funding to news outlets NPR and PBS, the White House latest attempt to use federal funding as leverage against blah 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 blah. I cannot talk. President Donald Trump signed an executive order that aims to cut funding to news outlets NPR and PBS, the White House said, marking Trump's latest attempt to use federal funding as leverage against institutions he does not view favorably. The order instructs the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which distributes funding to PBS and NPR stations, to cease and direct funding to them, according to the text released by the White House on May 1st. It labeled the news outlets as partisan and biased. The CPB board shall cancel existing direct funding to the maximum extent allowed by the law and shall decline to provide future funding, the order added. Both NPR and PBS have previously said that Trump's efforts to cut their funding would disrupt. Oh, okay. Uh, The Trump administration has labeled multiple institutions in academia and the media industry, from Harvard and Columbia universities to NPR and PBS, as being leftist, Marxist, biased, and woke, and threatens funding cuts. Human rights advocates have raised concerns over free speech and academic freedom. The CPB sued the White House on April 28th after Trump sought to fire 3 of its 5 board members. The nonprofit corporation was created by Congress in 1967 and provides funding for more than 1,500 locally managed public radio and TV stations. Several media outlets have reported the White House plans to ask Congress to rescind $1.1 billion in funding for the CPB, with the amount being 2 years' worth of funding. Okay, so he just wants them to cut this. Yeah, this is just so, like, it's so intellectually lazy and stupid. Like, I feel like for anybody who's watching this, I feel like they probably understand this, but I'm gonna say it anyways. NPR and PBS are apolitical entities. The people that work in there, sure, I'm sure the individuals that work in these organizations have political opinions. And it is entirely conceivable that if you collectivize all of their opinions and pulled it out or whatever, that it might be more left-leaning. NPR and PBS and the people that work there are fully and very much aware of the pseudo-political nature of the organization. And because of that, they work very, very hard to not appear as politically biased in one way, shape, or form. They go out of their way. They bend over backwards to ensure that they don't have any, like, overtly politically leaning in one way or the other content, or to do or say anything that could potentially piss off one side or the other. They are totally aware of this dynamic, and they work very hard to ensure that they appear apolitical and that they just do the job and the mandate they were given, which was create educational kids content, or create, like, news outlets, or help fund local radio stations. Like, this suggestion that these are political entities and that they're Marxist or like far left or whatever is just, like, completely devoid from reality. It's completely detached from reality, and it's so frustrating that so many people will just eat it up. And, like, this is the difference between being objective and being neutral. So many people confuse the concept of being objective and being neutral. You can be neutral between, the Republicans have this set of positions, the Democrats have this set of positions, and you can be exactly neutral in between the two, but it may not be and there may be some issues where the in-between spot may be the correct position, but to say that all of the issues, the correct position is perfectly in the middle, neutral spot between Democrats and Republicans is ridiculous. That's unobjective. The objectively correct spot very well could sit more on the left-wing side or on the right-wing side when you go issue by issue. But so many people confuse this concept, and as a result, they might see something that NPR PBS puts out that is, like, objective. They are doing objective journalism and analysis. And this objective journalism and analysis in question may point, like, okay, yeah, this left-wing opinion on this issue is the correct one, is the objectively correct one, or this right-wing position is the correct one, or this left-wing position isn't the correct one, or this right-wing position isn't the correct one. It is entirely possible for them to do that and have that be the result. But people who confuse objectivity and neutrality see that and they go, oh, they're being biased because they're showing objective content, but because I'm sort of stuck in this neutrality mindset, I see it as being biased because it doesn't sit exactly in the middle between the two where I think the right neutral position is, or whatever the heck you want to. It's just, it's frustrating that they would so lazily imply that these apolitical, good faith organizations that do very good work are propagandist, left-wing. How would they even, would they argue that they were originally that? Would they argue that PBS and NPR were originally created in the 60s for that purpose and that they have just always been that? Or are they arguing that, no, they used to be altruistic, but now they're not? Like, I don't understand what the argument is. It seems really illogical to me. But yeah, I guess we're finishing the show on the phone today. Freaking laptop battery died on me. What can you do? Well, it has been May 9th, 2025. I am Michael Winkler, and this has been The Mike Wink Show. Thank you very much. Peace out.